Welcome back to the Wingspan Podcast, episode 15. I'm Doug Barak, joined by my co-host Chris Mulholland of Nets Daily and our special guest. Today we will discuss former head coach Kenny Atkinson.
We welcome back Matt Brooks to the pod. Thank you for taking some time out of your night to join Doug and I. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm happy to be back in the New York area. Spent the weekend in Toronto, which is a wonderful, wonderful city. Very different from, I guess, the daily life that I enjoy here. I feel like I've hit the ground running, though. I'm sure everybody else is feeling this way. You guys especially. It is a crazy week to do anything. I hate using the C word, but content related for the Nets.
That was not the one I expected. I thought it was just crazy, but okay. Anyways, welcome back, not just to our country, to our state, to our city, but to the podcast. So once again, glad to have you back on. So let's get started. So we're going to be focusing on Kenny Atkinson, moving on, just to put it as mutual as possible for now. See what I did there? So anyways, where were you when the news broke that Kenny Atkinson and the Nets were mutually parting ways? Matt, we'll start with you, and we'll go into that a little bit.
I was really late. I think I was about like an hour or two late to it. I was in Toronto right as I was leaving for like a little brunch. I don't know what time. I don't know what time was that news originally broken.
I think it was
pretty damn early. 9:24, it feels like.
So I think it was like 11 when I checked, and I checked my phone, and originally I think my phone was dead. So I plugged in my phone, and the first couple texts I got were from a little text chain that I have with like two of my closest friends from California. And they were talking, like they were saying stuff about Kyrie and Kenny, and the word firing was in this thread, because usually your text will come in first, and then everything else will come in notification wise. So, originally I was like, what are they talking about? Like, what are these guys talking about right now? And then I see everything flowing, and I'm just like, well, this little vacation has been completely taken over by those good old Nets. So that's where I was, just getting flooded by notifications on my suddenly alive phone.
Gotcha. And what was your first initial reaction?
Completely shocked. I don't think anybody expected this level of a decision to be made. One, to even be made in the first place, two, to be made at this time. I just think that was something that really no one could expect. And even after that tough loss that last week in Memphis, it just seemed inconceivable to think that the Nets would move on from their head coach before their two best players even would come back.
Yeah, for sure. And Chris, what about you? Where were you when the news first broke?
I was actually, this is going to sound funny, because one of those things where you just remember exactly what you were doing and where you are when something like this happens.
Oh, 100%. That's why I phrased it like this.
So I was actually pouring myself a bowl of Frosted Flakes when it was happening. I checked my phone. I'm specific on the details, but I remember, and I checked my phone. I saw the initial tweet first from Shams. And then right after, obviously, the Twitter notifications just started coming in. And I would say my first initial reaction to it, like everyone else, like Matt just mentioned, is obviously just shock. You're surprised that Kenny just kind of got let go, kind of just with this many games left in the season, especially after the Memphis loss. And just kind of, there was no kind of lead into it. There wasn't any type of signals that, this was heating up in any way. Obviously, there was speculation, I guess you could say, that, okay, maybe he's on the hot seat, or the seat's kind of a little hot, but no one expected, all right, they're moving on and that's it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, for me, like, I was still in bed. I don't know if I just couldn't go back to sleep, but all of a sudden I just kept hearing my phone vibrate a little bit. I don't recall if it was either Pooch, Woj, or Shams, because I believe Pooch may have broken it first by like seconds. I'm not 100% certain, but
I believe so.
But yeah, he definitely, hit fast with that one. And my initial reaction, I mean, I don't know how to describe it per se. I don't remember it that thoroughly, but I was on Twitter like hours, just laying in bed, staring at my phone. Like, normally when I'm going through Twitter purgatory, it's like after a Nets win or after a Nets loss. And I know purgatory after a win sounds weird, but like you jump into that rabbit hole, it takes a while to get out. So I have a follow-up for both of you guys. Chris, you want to go first? Was the timing right?
Was the timing right? In my opinion, I think that they should have at least given him, because you got. Let me trace this back before I give my answer.
Yeah,
Kenny was the one that built this, right? He took over the franchise when they were rock bottom. Obviously, the moves that were made, the gradual increase over the years. In my opinion, the reason why I was shocked is because of the timing of it, right? I'm not going to sit here thinking, okay, Kenny was always going to be viewed as that coach that could take them to, I guess you could say, the promised land, right? My initial reaction was, I'm surprised that they didn't. At least I would think that if this move was going to be made, that they were going to do it at least in the off season. If not, give him a chance 12, 15 games into next season to see what he could do with those two superstars and Kyrie and Kevin Durant on the court at the same time. And then the decision could be more evaluated. And obviously, this was before, obviously, all the reports came out, the details of it and everything. But at that time, I just didn't think the timing was right. And
what about you, Matt? Do you feel the time was right?
I would go with probably a no, just because, I understand the idea of like you probably don't want to make a coaching change halfway through next season. That just kind of completely disturbs everything that's going on. But I just think it's really discombobulating for this franchise to make this decision kind of near the end of the year. You just rarely see that. I feel like guys usually will make it all the way through till the summer, and then the team will make a decision in place, whatever that may be. But my biggest thing was this is I do think that my answer is a little bit incomplete in a lot of ways, depending upon what they do in the next couple of months. Like if they have somebody that comes in that's a way better candidate than Kenny, and there aren't many of those out there, then I would totally change my answer. Like, yeah, they seem to have had a grip on somebody coming in, kind of similar to how they knew that Kyrie was going to go play for them, and they got rid of Russell, and they made that pretty clear in the last month of free agency. So I could see that changing, but for now, I'm kind of staunchly against the idea that he should have been fired now.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, the timing for me was just so strange. I mean, after that crazy blowout win against, Sean Mark's old team, Thiago's old team, etc. Like, I mean, if you told me this was like after the Hawks lost or after all these collapses that you wrote about in the Nets Daily article, or specifically, like the Grizzlies one, for example, like, yeah, I truly would have believed it, because normally the media doesn't wait that long for Kenny to do his thing. So it's, quite strange. But also, I kind of wanted to see what he would be like with a full roster. Like, you didn't get Wilson Chandler until 25 games in, had 20 games of Kyrie, not even KD. So you basically play $69 million for 20 games of just Kyrie. And that's like, I think it's unfair for Kenny in that regard, but we'll obviously talk about the reasons, whether they're true or not, later on. But it's very unusual. I mean, it wasn't like the writing on the wall was as visible as what was going on in Cleveland, which was so strange. It's bizarre. Or the David Blatt thing, which was a couple of years back. But I don't know.
No, I agree with you guys. And so the next question I'm going to ask is we're going to apply this to sports. Is there really such a thing as a mutual breakup? Matt, let me get your opinion on
that. Yes, although I do feel like it's applied a little too regularly. But like a couple that come to mind, this Kenny one, I think, is legitimately a mutual breakup. The Mike Budenholzer in Atlanta back in, I guess that was 2017, 2018. That was definitely mutual. They were clearly going to go another direction. They were going to enter a rebuilding phase. They went with a new, younger coach in Lloyd Pierce, and he went to greener pastures in Milwaukee. But then there's the other situations where it's like a Lakers last year with Luke Walton, where it's like, is that mutual, or is that somebody calling the shots who may or may not be LeBron James, and saying, hey, I want this guy out of here. And that was rumored for months, So I think it can be, but it is something that is, I guess, applied a little too widespread across the sport. It's become a little bit of a cliche almost.
Yeah, no.
I agree with that. That's a good take. What about you, Doug? What was your opinion?
So such a weird concept because mutual breakups, like I always think relationships, which it's such a weird phrasing. Like, I mean, I think, is it possible? Yeah, sure. Is this a situation where it counts? Based on new reports, it might actually be for once. I mean, it's certainly more mutual than the Jason Kidd breakup, where it's like he wants a little bit more, and that's like, nah. So they do. I guess the mutual benefactor isn't when they found the trade partner for Jason Kidd per se, but other than those weird instances, I think it's so uncommon to like think it's a real thing. But hey, I mean, denial works in various ways, whether it's true or not. What about you, Chris?
I agree with that take. And one thing too, like you just mentioned too, it's kind of hard in sports to kind of concept around the total term of just a mutual breakup, right? Because usually with a breakup, one side is obviously going to lean towards their certain take on it. So is this a mutual breakup? In my opinion, I would still, my initial kind of take on it is I would like to see how things kind of develop as time goes on. As you know, in sports, as soon as the dust kind of settles, that's when the real details do come out. So, but at this point, do I think it's a mutual breakup? I think that it does have a lot of forms of mutuality.
Yeah, no, definitely. It was very shocking, I'd say. But anyways, it's time to deep dive into the rumor mill. So I'm going to mention a rumor, and you have to share your reactions. I'll give mine last after each of you give yours. Kenny Atkinson is no longer with the Nets because, per multiple sources, DeAndre Jordan could no longer accept his role coming off the bench. Chris, let's start with you.
Oh man, I would say that's probably not the total case, right? I would say it's a reasoning to it. And if you look at DeAndre throughout his career, right, I would say up until he got to Brooklyn, that was throughout his whole career, he's always been named a kind of a starter, right? Because if you look, when you go back to the rookie year, I think it was 2008 when he started with the Clippers, that's when he kind of really came off the bench. His name in 2019, he came off the bench. I think it was 53 in 70 games, and then he started, I think it was 25 between those first two seasons of his. And then right away after that, became the starter. Just the majority of the season, and then from there, it just worked on to that. And I think with DeAndre, obviously, we'll get into the other reports, but with DeAndre, I could see maybe he expected something kind of different, maybe a bigger role considering the contract he signed. And obviously Jared Allen, him coming off the bench to him, and maybe the play of Jared Allen kind of projectiled the idea of, okay, why aren't I starting? Am I the veteran center on this team? I know how to win. I know how to kind of have that role as that starting center and have that veteran voice on the defensive and offensive end. But would I say that that's the reason, or that's kind of the main reason Kenny Atkinson is no longer with the Nets? I would kind of have to go with no at this point with all the things that are out there.
Definitely understand. I mean, a lot of the things we're going to cover are probably partial reasons. But Matt, what's your feelings thus far?
If this is the one that, and I don't know, I feel like I lost track of how many reports there were at this point.
So many.
It's been a little overwhelming. But if this is the one that stems from Lowe, he kind of, the way he prefaced this, like he said, he obviously had like the thing that was aggregated a little bit and you know, using a bunch of different, you know, I guess Twitter, whatever, like little Twitter shares or like shorter form articles, that just the quote of like, oh, you know, Atkinson's one of the big issues was DeAndre Jordan's role. But when Lowe was sort of detailing this, it wasn't so much that DeAndre was complaining about his role. It was just more thinking about it from like a macro sense that DeAndre Jordan, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant all chose Brooklyn because they wanted to play together. So if DeAndre Jordan's coming off the bench, he's not really playing with Kyrie and KD. And I know they can obviously do like an early sub into the game if they want to give those guys a bunch of playing time together. But still, like from a visual, even like marketing perspective, he's not really in that core of the big three, if you want to call it that, because that's kind of, I think, how they wanted to be perceived a little bit.
Yeah, no, definitely, I feel that.
So, I think, as you said, there's a variety of reasons. It seems like it was a really complicated decision that took months and months to kind of make. And when something takes that long, it's obviously going to be a bunch of factors. It's not going to be something just as simple as one rotational decision. I think it was just a general feeling within that locker room and from Kenny as well that that this just wasn't working.
Yeah, I mean, how do you guys feel? And either you can answer first. Is there a big difference between being a starter and a closer? Like, let's say you start but you don't close, or you don't start but you close. Because kind of at times that switched in between. Like, their minutes were almost identical. It would basically be, not always, but sometimes in the flow of the game, who got more minutes. But sometimes there's that prestige of having that starter on the mantle kind of thing. So whoever wants to go first, be my guest.
I'll grab that one real quick. To be honest with you, so yes, I do agree with that. I don't know if either one of Brooklyn's bigs would be starting down or would be closing down the stretch. Like, they might go, and I don't know, maybe this is just me. Like, I guess I really am a disciple of Kenny. But I would look at running a little bit of Katie at the 5 in really high pressure situations, maybe a little bit more of a playoff lineup. But I don't know if I would have Jared Allen nor DeAndre Jordan, should those be the two centers on the team next year. We'll see. I don't know if I'd have either of those guys closing in big moments, big playoff games. I might go with a different lineup and see what you can do with that.
And what do you think for this season specifically? Because obviously that was the biggest toss around. And even though probably in the why Kenny was fired scale could be close to like a 4 or 5, which isn't that much out of 10 in my opinion. Like, it's like getting prodded at.
I guess I would go. I don't know. It's kind of tough because like I'm surprised that the DeAndre stuff was blown a little bit out of proportion. Because honestly, if I were him, I would be trying to preserve my body for next year. And then you can worry about like, hey, why am I not starting? It's not like your two closest friends are playing at all, especially in these last 2 months, and even throughout the season, Kyrie Irving was in and out of the lineup so much. So I don't know. I'm just, again, like, I think this all kind of stems from the same central issue for me, that I'm just surprised it happened now when all this stuff came out now. When really, like, it kind of, like, I hate to say this, I hate to be this guy, but it doesn't really matter who starts and finishes games right now. It doesn't matter, what the rotations look like right now. Obviously, you want to build some championship culture, and if that's the real issue, then yes, I do agree that should be something that should be handled. But if it just comes down to rotations and stuff like that right now, those rotations are going to change next year's anyways. Like, the stuff about Prince being miscast. Yeah, he's miscast because Brooklyn's starting power forward is missed the entire season with an Achilles injury. So I don't know. I think that's a little bit overblown, honestly.
And what about you, Chris?
So a little follow-up. I agree majority on Matt's point of view right there, is that in the NBA terms, I'm going to take it a broader term, just talking about basic, just broad NBA, right? Between a starter and a closer, it comes down to kind of the certain player on the certain team, right? If it's a player like you saw it kind of with Terry Rozier, right? Last year, the Celtics, he even said, like, I'm not, like, before obviously he signed with the Hornets, he's like, I don't feel like I'm going to accept my same role that I do because of my contract. I feel like I'm worth more, whatever the case is. But in the Nets case, right, DeAndre Jordan having that 4-year contract, and with Jared Allen, obviously, things are looming a little bit. His name's been kind of tossed around, like Matt's, like we've all kind of speculated here and there. But for this season at least, I would say that it doesn't necessarily kind of matter who comes off and who does the bench. Like Matt made a good point right there in the very beginning. DeAndre Jordan, Katie, and Kyrie, they all, when they went into media day and they were talking, they mostly said, we came to Brooklyn so we could play together. If DeAndre's coming off the bench, he's not, obviously they're still playing together, but they're not having that same unity that they all kind of were FaceTiming over when they decided to come to the Nets, right? And like Matt said, down the stretch, are those two guys going to be in the rotation next year for that conversation? We don't know that because obviously going into next year and even the off season, there's going to be a lot of changes that are going to be made. Whether they're small, big, it's going to be hovered around. So that's kind of just my kind of small take on it.
Yeah, no, definitely agree with both of you. I mean, I thought it was a good point that Matt kind of brought up. Kind of the DeAndre doesn't have to go, as hard as he may or may not be, because at times fans can see him lagging around. But anyways, I'm going to bring up the next Kenny is no longer with the Nets because, per Vince Goodwill of Yahoo Sports, Kenny wasn't fond of coaching Durant and Irving based on what he saw this season.
I don't know. I mean, I just think it's so hard for you to get. It depends on what he's looking at. Like, they're one of the top. I think they're sitting around top 8, maybe like 8, 9. The difference between like teams in defensive rating is like a mere couple of like percentage, or I guess decimal points. So it's not huge, but they are number 8 right now, and they could be really anywhere from 8 to 11 with a couple of changes throughout games. So, which is good. You want to be in that top portion in terms of defensive efficiency. Offensively, if it doesn't look right, well, you guys are going to be filling in. So all those, downhill Joe Harris drives and Spencer Dinwiddie kind of like trying to create on his own with a shot expiring, or Karis LeVert when he's been on the floor doing a really great job there. Those ideally should be replaced by both of these guys, which I'm sure in their own mind look at themselves as top players in the league and really are top anywhere between top 12, top 15, depending on how you really want to align everything. So, I mean, I don't know. If that's really true, then I think you need to look at it a little bit different if I were them, at least.
Yeah. What do you think, Chris?
I agree with Matt on this one, and I'm going to take a little bit of a different road down on this. But if you look at, like Matt just said, with Joe Harris and Spencer Dinwiddie, when Kevin Durant, everyone knows Kyrie Irving from at least the 20 games he's played this season, is when he has the ball and he's set the drive, all eyes are on him. It's not like Spencer Dinwiddie that drives and all the eyes go to him. It's more of, okay, let me just space back and kind of keep an eye on my man. If it's Kyrie Irving, they know if he's going down that lane, he is likely going to take that drive. And kind of the different take that to not bounce off Matt is if you look at Kenny, right, it says Kenny wasn't fond of coaching Durant and Irving based on what he saw this season, right? If you just take a quick kind of glimpse at Kenny's head coaching, kind of his history, right? He's never really dealt with this situation and having this many stars on his team given his role. So he was with the Knicks for a little bit, two title runs, 2 playoff runs, not title runs, no way near that. But then he went to Atlanta from 2013 to 2016 before he went to the Nets, obviously. And if you just look at that, there was kind of a good core knit, something a little to the extra bar that the Nets had at the time. But there wasn't that pressure, I guess you could say, especially under his role to perform. And I think that was kind of what kind of was haunting him. And obviously, like we saw in the reports, kind of moving up outside of Goodwill's report, I would say, was he not fond of coaching based on what he saw this season? I felt like the pressure was kind of mounting up a little bit, and obviously with the outside voice of what we heard with the team meetings. So that's kind of my take on it as of now. I would have liked to see the Nets give Kenny a shot with these two guys on the floor at the same time. That's kind of my take on it. I could admit this. I wasn't the guy that totally thought that Kenny was the right fit to lead the Nets to the championship on the full way. But I think the Nets should have at least given him the opportunity to see those two on the floor.
Yeah, no, definitely.
That's kind of my take.
I have more to say, but we'll get to that when I bring up my self-made theory. But anyways, so Kenny is no longer with the Nets because Ian Begley, if I said that right, not to say Ian, shout out to Ian Eagle, several veterans had questions about whether Atkinson was the right coach to lead Brooklyn to an NBA title, which kind of is like the reverse feel, because the other question was like Kenny wasn't fond of the star thing, but now it's the other way around. Did they have that faith in Kenny?
So I'm thinking with this one, right? Some veterans had questions whether Atkinson was right to coach and lead Brooklyn to an NBA title. Veterans kind of have that. Everyone knows that they have that strong voice in the locker room, and with the Nets and their core pieces heading in that they've brought back from the previous team, they're all somewhat still young. And I think veteran talk, and especially with the names such as kind of KD, Kyrie, like even when I go to, I'll just give a little personal comparison to kind of put a perspective in it. When I talk to like Nick Claxton and John and Musa and a lot of these younger guys that are affiliated with this team, whenever I bring up Kevin Durant or Kyrie Irving, they smile like they're literally gods. They're literally basketball. They understand the legacy behind those names. So when it says Kenny wasn't fond of coaching, or when some veterans had questions whether Atkinson was the right coach or not, that is something that obviously happens in the locker room. That's whether the veterans are talking, saying, hey, from personal experience, I know a coach can fit well in this situation. With two of our best players being out and not coming back till next season, especially with being in the New York media market, having the expectation to win an NBA title, at least one in their tenure. That's kind of my viewpoint on it. Whether the veterans actually kind of questions Atkinson's style of coaching and that aspect to it, that's something to wait to see. Obviously, you see with DeAndre Jordan, like we mentioned earlier, can no longer accept his role off the bench. Ironically, in Jeff Vaughn's first game, he started. So that has a connection between the two. So that's kind of just my small take on it.
And what about you, Matt?
All right. So here's my thing is, which of these veterans have been on a championship roster? That's
exactly the point I was going to make as well. They don't have that, like you just said, they don't have that kind of tight, that whatever the resume to it. Besides from KD and Kyrie Irving, Garrett Temple's kind of been in and out of the G League and stuff like that, and other veterans as well. DeAndre Jordan's been around the league and stuff. But continue with your point. I agree with that.
No, I honestly want to ask you guys that and just give that to the floor, because here's the thing, like, they've had a lot of veterans in the past. They had Carroll, Ed Davis, Jared Dudley just last year, Trevor Booker in previous seasons, a bunch of other ones. We don't need to go through them all. None of those guys had issues with their minutes being yanked around. Jared Dudley was a starter for the first, couple of, I guess, like 10, maybe even 10, 20 games last year, and then completely had his minutes yanked around. It was never an issue. And maybe it's just a different cast of veterans this year. I don't know. But I will say this, is that there's only a few veterans that I think could really, really make their voices not necessarily heard, but there's only a few veterans that would really, really, I think, create enough of a buzz for this to be a possible reason for him to lose his job. And it's not Wilson Chandler, who was suspended for 25 games. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel that. I mean, for me personally, the reason why, I'm not a veteran. I've barely been a basketball fan compared to you guys and a lot of people, but like, development, fine. You've sold me. But when it came to in-game adjustments, and I think it's been lightly mentioned, like, he stuck with his principles through and through. Like, as I tweeted about, he lived and demised by his system. So I felt like, I think they saw that sometimes when it came to minutes or end of game type movement, or like living and dying by the three, like, he stuck with that. And it cost him some wins. Now, whether or not, it was because there's a lot of new guys on the team, that's another story. Or you're missing 2 stars that you're like kind of running plays for guys that's supposed to be them. Like, a lot of role players played like, they're going to be starters on most teams, but that's not the case next year. Like, a lot of these guys are not going to get those touches and whatnot. So I think they had rights to question him. Will he ever make it back to that? Because the teams that he was on, like, they were playoff teams. They were middling teams. We never got, besides, his head coach with the Philly, which, he had a chance to stop a crazy run. He won 1 game, almost won 2, maybe even 3. And sometimes those adjustments, they add up. But it's hard not to believe Kyrie, KD, DJ for that matter. I mean, I'm naming names, but I will not play it was just Kyrie card. I'm just going to say that right then and there. I don't know if you guys have any follow-ups. If not, we go for the next reason.
He touched on it there. I agree with that.
All right, here comes the big one. So Kenny Atkinson is no longer with the Nets because, per The Athletic, the Nets held a spirited team meeting, starting with several veterans expressing that they want to see Spencer Dinwiddie play like the player they know, and later the people in the room calling out Dinwiddie and DeAndre Jordan. Durant chimed in, pointing out that the Nets must improve their habits and they were not building the proper culture traits necessary for a title contender. All right, Matt, here's the big one. Go for it.
That's a loaded one. It's weird that Dinwiddie got singled out. I will say this, with how much his game is predicated on going downhill and just sort of bull rushing the rim. That is a tough style of play to sustain, I think, in a lot of ways. And because he's sort of working this way, that's just a way that I think really honestly exhausts really any and all reserves that you have, energy-wise, mentally. So I'm surprised that he was singled out because he kept that team afloat for a solid 2-3 weeks when Kyrie Irving really first got injured. So I was a little disappointed if that was true, and you got to take everything with a grain of salt because I don't think we're really going to know exactly what happened until, as Chris said earlier, it's going to be probably a month or so until we get the full entire story. You know, somebody like a Baxter Holmes or somebody like that, or Lowe, or somebody will do a full story and kind of detail everything that happened. But yeah, I think that I really hate to see that for him. I think he put his all out, was a near all-star, and yeah, I don't know. That was my immediate takeaway to that. I don't even know if I think it's a real reason or not. If it is, I don't think it's a legitimate one, and it's not fair to him.
There's so many pieces to this puzzle. I mean, it's crazy jigsaw. And what about your thoughts on? I mean, we touched upon DJ already, so let's skip that. So, what do you think the mood was when Durant chimed in? Like,
I mean, you have to respect it. Like, he's won at the highest level. He's one of the best players in the league. He was arguably the best player of last season before he went down with injury. I think you could make a pretty strong argument for him or Kawhi. I would actually probably argue for Kevin Durant over Kawhi, although I know Kawhi had an amazing run to get to the finals. But, yeah, when that guy speaks, you listen. He can be wrong. He can be right. He can be somewhere in the middle. Doesn't matter. When he speaks, you listen.
Yeah, and what about you, Chris?
I would say I'd agree with Matt. Obviously, like I mentioned before, you don't know the full story until the whole dust settles, right? And I would say with Dinwiddie, like Matt said, his play is kind of hard to maintain those numbers. That if they say, that he needs to play like the player that they know, it's hard. And this kind of just shows to me, and it visibly shows that frustration's kind of starting to brew a little bit. And the expectation factor, and obviously kind of that the franchise doesn't know exactly what a good finish to this season is. Everyone's been calling it a wash season because these two players are out. They had that persona over it. It's okay. Let's hope the Nets make it to the playoffs so their younger players can get another year of playoff experience into that, build a little more hunger, and then when the full arsenal comes in, then it's go time. So, and like Matt said, when Kevin Durant chimes into a conversation, like I mentioned before, even during my time with Long Island, covering these young guys, whenever I mentioned KD or Kyrie, I could only imagine what it's like when KD chimes in on a topic like this, or a topic that, okay, the Nets need to improve their habits, and especially with the idea of culture traits, because he's done it before. He's done it on the big level. Finals MVP, finals. His voice is one of those voices in the NBA that are very few, that is mostly whatever he says you're going to take with more than just a grain of salt. It's going to be very valuable, especially when title contention and mostly the kind of just at least getting an NBA title is kind of what the nation and the NBA fan base and the universe kind of sees on this Nets team as it is currently. That's kind of my just take on it.
No, definitely. I mean, for the Dinwiddie thing, I've said this a few times. At times I miss the great turnover ratio Dinwiddie, but yeah, it is important that he has this scoring capability. But I'm curious. Let's say he is one of the pieces that are not traded, not only because he's great insurance to Kyrie, but theoretically, if he goes back to finding his way to be that turnover assist ratio, that would do wonders for Kyrie. But then he also has to get his 3-point shooting up. But for me, it was the late game execution, which Matt had covered beautifully in the Net Daily article. He held the ball like, I don't know how to, like quicksand-ish kind of situation, but clearly when Durant chimes in, you listen. But you know the name that wasn't mentioned? that every Celtics fan, every Cavs fan, hell, even Knicks fans wanted to hear? Kyrie. We only really got that with that Lou type rumor, but we'll get to that later. Anyways, we got a few more before we transition out of the rumor mill. So basically, another reason why Kenny Atkinson is no longer the Nets, because per a Nets fan, Kenny is extremely against veganism in athletes. Matt, let's go again.
Oh boy.
If you can articulate words, because I don't know, it's kind of beyond me.
I haven't heard that one. I'll put it that way.
And what about you, Chris?
I'm gonna take this out of Kenny, right? If an athlete wants to go vegan and it works with their diet and they're performing on the court at their highest level, I'm in favor of it. It's just that simple. That's kind of just my take on it. That it shouldn't be. If the athlete's comfortable with it and they believe that it does boost their performance and kind of action and just it kind of is just shown out there on the court, I am fine with it. That's kind of just how I am. But to kind of put Kenny's name in that, I'm gonna have to lean on Matt for that one, kind of for an in-depth one. I don't know how to kind of take that one.
Well, hopefully Beyond Meat sponsors us for that endorsement. Anyways,
what about you? What about you, Doug?
I mean, do what you want, man. Like, eat what you want. I mean, tonight I had a veggie burger. Like, I love my freezer food. That's how I eat healthy at times. Like, believe me, I'm terrible when it comes to ordering food and going out with my friends. But like, for my good eats, I'll have like canned soup. You know, I'm perfect for when the world ends because my freezer's always full. My canned goods are always there, and a lot of it just happens to be, I mean, I can't say vegan, but at least veggie. So let's go with that. So anyways, let's get a little more serious, right? So Kenny Atkinson is no longer with the Nets because, per various NBA fans, Kyrie asked a randomly deep question, and Kenny did not like, and he did not like Kenny's answer. Do either of you have a response to that besides,
I'm going to go with Matt. Yeah, take it. Go first, Matt.
What's the question?
All right, I'll say it again. So per various...
No. What's the question that he asked?
Yeah, that's...
I don't know. Like, what does the government mean to you?
Yeah.
Is the world round? I mean, take your pick. Like, the most obscure questions. I mean, like, do you actually believe that we have a third eye that can, see things for beyond what they are? It's so philosophical, so deep. I mean, if this is it, man, I don't even know how to respond. I feel like I should just stare at clouds and...
Yeah. This is like a critic question. It's like a critic. This is like a critic theory, right? This is
when you make coffee, do you like a black? Do you like it with milk in it? Do you like milk and sugar? When you have eggs, you scramble it. If so, like, do you mix it all the way with the yolk, mix with the white? Like, that kind of questions kind of thing. Like, if that's what it is, we'll never... That will be a stain on Nets history in such a strange way. That's how I personally want to leave it. I just thought it was a funny, but go with it. Like, let Kyrie open his third eye, man. Like, that's... But... So actually ended on a serious one before we transition to... a transition out of this rumor mill of whatever you want to call it at this point. But basically, have you noticed the theme? It hasn't thus far been just solely Kyrie. So we can reassess this in a month or two, whatever. But as of now, that, sorry not to be clickbaity, guys, but it doesn't seem to just be Kyrie. But last and most importantly, I'm going to go with the one I wrote up. So Kenny Atkinson is no longer the team because Kenny wanted to go out on his own terms. Kenny probably missed simpler times, taking things year by year, developing his own core, defined core, yes, I know, winning with them. No shortcuts, keeping the culture intact. The shift took the fun love out of his job, and that's my partial theory. How do you react with that? I know it's very happy, no clickbaity, but go for it, guys. Whoever wants to go first, let's go Chris for this matter.
I would say, like I brought up before with Kenny Atkinson, I just feel like that this type of team, he's just not used to coaching, right? So I think that he went out on his own terms. Like I said, that will only be settled that will only be determined when the dust settles, and that won't be for at least, I would say, maybe a couple weeks to a month, because that's when the real details start coming up. You could start kind of putting wires together, and you could start really solving this equation, right? But like Doug, you said, I agree with some parts of this. When you just said Kenny probably missed the simpler times, taking things year by year, developing his core. One thing about Kenny, right? And I know both of you kind of could chime in on this as well. Kenny's been labeled as a development mastermind and a development coach, right? And that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing for any NBA coach. But I felt like with Kenny, that's just kind of what he was bought into. And since this was his first head coaching gig coming back in April 17th of 2016, thanks, Doug, for putting that in the chat. I would say that's just kind of what he's been labeled as. You see kind of just the stars that, not stars, but players he's developed. You see D'Angelo Russell, what everyone likes to say, oh, the Lakers traded him to school. Kenny was his professor. He groomed him into a point guard, and now look what he's doing. And like you said, keeping that culture intact, I feel like it's hard to kind of maintain that tough grit culture, fighting, that kind of dogfight team, that underdog, just what the whole culture was kind of made of, just that tough knit. When you have those two, they don't even need introductions. Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, everyone's seen what they do. Kyrie Irving, arguably he made the biggest shot in NBA history. Kevin Durant needs no introduction, like he said himself. You just see kind of what it is. Did it take the fun out of his job? He's not used to it. That's one thing for sure, because he sees, okay, now it's not taking a team from little win gaps here and there, developing kind of a culture and making this franchise turn around and start winning. It's all, the focus is on titles. If you think of the Nets, everyone thinks of, okay, they got to win a title here. They got two juggernaut superstars here. They got a good core roster, even though I believe that there's definitely need to be some changes here and there. I'm not going to say what, but everyone knows that there's going to have to be some changes. But did it take the fun and love out of his job? Like I said, he's just not used to it. I just feel like it was fun for him just seeing that and taking a franchise and coaching them, taking them from rock bottom to putting them back on the NBA map. Like when he took over, no one really had the Brooklyn Nets on their NBA radar map. Now look at them, for example, they got the two names to them. And when you think of contenders for next year, they're a team that immediately pops in every casual NBA fan's heads. So I agree with this take. I agree with many parts of this take. Did he go out on his own terms? That will have to be settled when the dust kind of settles down and you could just start putting wires together.
Yeah, and what about you, Matt? What do you think at this point?
I think that, and this is me speculating.
Of course, completely. I mean that's all we're doing. You can be wrong. It's okay.
I probably am. I would assume because him and Marks are and were and are still close, that he came to Marks and told him basically, I feel like I'm losing the locker room. I feel like there's been some displeasure with how I've handled things. I think that Kenny was very cognizant of everything that was going on. Do I think that he was the one that made the final call and said, okay, you know what? Let's mutually agree to draw the axe on me. No, I don't think that probably happened. I think that when and again, I just sort of like try to like pierce through this whole report and everything that's gone through it. When they say that it's, a mutual decision, I think by mutual, they mean that both sides knew it wasn't going well, but I don't think that Kenny and Sean Marks met in the hallway and were both like, hey, let's just break this off right now. I think it was more like initiated by Sean Marks. Kenny Atkinson had been sort of talking about how he didn't feel like it was going great, and he was okay with it.
Yeah, definitely.
I agree with that. I agree with that. Doug, what about you? I know you did say that's my partial theory, but I want to get a little bit more thoughts out of you for this one.
So, I mean, I mentioned a little bit before the in-game adjustments was something that's always been, to me, the first writing on the walls. Like, he never really, old habits kind of thing. But here's what I got to say. And I'm going to try and say it without laughing because, well, you'll realize in just a sec. So,
oh boy, buckle up.
If I can not stop laughing, yeah, for sure. So, for what is a man? What has he got? If not himself, then he has not. Not to say that things he truly feels, and not the words of someone who kneels. The record shows I took all the blows, and I did it my way. That was really it. But that was actually that was just the ending of Frank Sinatra's song. I did it my way. So there's you, Kenny. You did it your way, and that's one of the ways we're going to take it. So, Chris, on to you.
This podcast episode is brought to you by Anchor. Anchor is an app that allows podcast producers to record and create original content. It is free to record and create a podcast, giving producers the ability to easily edit their material off their phone or computer. Anchor allows producers and talent to make money off their work with no minimum listenership. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you on platforms such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and many more. To get started, Anchor app or go to anchor.fm. Anchor for Doug and I has been great and allows us to bring unique, creative, and opinionated content to listeners of the Wingspan Podcast. All right, we're going to transition a little bit. We're going to talk about culture because that's obviously the major talking point and the major debate, I would say, outside of why is Kenny gone. This is kind of the second layer, I would say, to it. So I'll start with Matt first. Matt, do you think that this is the end of the Schmarks, as Doug liked to put the pun in there, the Sean Marks, and to the Nets culture?
Oh, it was done June 30th, at least in terms of or July 1st, whatever you want to go with. At least in terms of like the fun-loving, I'm sure there's still a family atmosphere and that I guess the coaching staff in the front office wants to prioritize the families of the players on the team. But in terms of that fun-loving, very warm, and most of all, a locker room with no expectations, because that's what really changed. That's what the biggest difference is between, last year's culture, exciting upstart team, is that those guys weren't acting under expectations. This year, things are a lot more grave. And next year, it's going to be even just more wild, where there's expectations, there's pressures to perform because there is a championship on the horizon. So I think it was, pretty much over the second, they signed both these guys. And that sounds negative, but it's mostly just a reflection of they're in a new atmosphere almost. There are very few teams that can maintain their culture as well as, compete for a championship. Like the Warriors are a total anomaly in that sense.
I agree with that. Doug, what about you? You think this is the end of the Nets culture?
I want to call it a remix. I think that's a more positive way of putting it because we really don't know until next season. Like, what if they hire a coach and gets fired right away? Or what if this puts Sean Marks more officially on the hot seat than he's definitely on a seat for sure. The low warmth we got going on, but there's a lot to see. But I'm going to call it the remix for now. What about you, Chris?
Yeah, I was going to touch on exactly what Matt mentioned. I would say the moment that Woj tweeted out in that famous tweet that Katie and Kyrie are choosing Brooklyn, that's when the culture was redefined. Like Doug said, a remix. That this team, the major conception behind the Nets culture in the past couple of years was house money, right? They were playing with house money last year in the playoffs. Everyone knew that they were not going to be a title team. They built that tough team, that dog team. Their whole roster was kind of, each player had a good story. You look at Spencer Dinwiddie from coming up from, at that time, the D-League. Sean Marks scouting him out, giving him the opportunity. You see Karis LeVert, someone that came out of the draft with a lingering ankle issue. He slid in the draft, and he gave him kind of that chance, and look what he's become today. You see a lot of kind of those connections with a lot of the Nets culture in the past couple of days, and Kenny was the mastermind behind it because he was the coach, right? And like Matt mentioned, once the moment that Katie and Kyrie were announced to the Nets, the first thing that went through everyone's mind is, wow, this is a big market team now in New York that has title expectations. And that's something that the Nets culture did not introduce. That's not something that the Nets culture in terms of that team, kind of had braced fully until that move was made. It was redefined at that moment. But I would say with this Atkinson hiring, that was kind of that clean slate. That's when it officially cut off. It was hanging, and it cut off right there when Atkinson kind of let, obviously, the mutual breakup. And I would say from there that the Nets culture now is, okay, they're just your basic title contending franchise. They're in a big market. They're in New York. They have many storylines, obviously what's going on with the Knicks, how wonderful would it be for Brooklyn to win a title in New York City and kind of just be that team in the big market that wins it all and everything. So I would say that's my take on it. Is at the end of the Nets culture, it's redefined. It's a remix as of now. As like I said plenty of times in this pod, when the dust settles, that's when we'll find out the real details. That's when you can really further evaluate. But at this time, the franchise has moved to a different stage. Instead of being that franchise that's well known for kind of making the best out of players that were limited on certain other teams, or being that kind of aspect, having that dogfight mentality, that tough guy, that, okay, they're not going to be your typical first-round exit team that's going to be an easy sweep for a top Eastern Conference team like you saw in last year's playoffs. They're going to make you work for it. And that's kind of what the Nets culture is kind of built around. So I'm going to have to take that approach on it. But, yeah, let's move on to the next one. So which team – this is kind of a fun one as of now. Let's speculate a little bit, guys. So which team do you think Kenny ends up with, and what do you think is the best fit for Kenny, and what team do you think is mostly the most well-founded to bring in Kenny? So we'll start with Matt on this one.
Knicks would be interesting. I don't think a lot of people, I mean, obviously Nets fans would hate to see that, but it would be an interesting situation for him where he'd have basically all of the opportunity in the world to do exactly as he wants, which seems like it's what he wants to do. Cleveland would be fun just because there are at least a couple of, like, Colin Sexton seems to be something. Darius Garland seems like he can pull up from long range. We'll see if he can do a little more than that and start to become a little bit more of a traditional point guard. Really, any of these Eastern Conference roles, I think that's would be where he would be looking. I do think he'll get thrust into, and I do hate to box him in as like a developmental guy, because if I was a team, I'd be doing due diligence, whether or not you're rebuilding or you're in, the playoff hunt. But I do think that just because of his resume now that speaks to, hey, we took this Brooklyn team with basically no draft capital and just the ability to fish in the G League and turn this into a landscape that was attractive to stars, that's going to speak to every team in the league, especially some of those other ones that are a little bit bigger market. Knicks, Bulls come to mind, but I think it'll be. I would probably lean towards maybe something in the Eastern Conference, one of those lower seeded teams this year.
Good take. Doug, what about you?
So I agree with the teams. One team I will add, I think the Kings would be a fun one.
I agree with that one.
Because I did not like the hire in the first place. There was no reason why. But even a potential Nets head coach, which we'll get up to later, was fired for Luke Walton because, for whatever reason. But I think the Kings would be fun for him. There's a lot of guard play, works for his style, a lot of fast-moving pieces. I think that would be my choice for the West. Ones that obviously some fans might like the D'Lo return, whether or not, I don't know, but definitely the Kings are the highest on my list for the West Coast. The dark horse would be, we'll touch on this a little bit later, but the Pop Kenny switch. Kenny gets the rebuild in San Antonio, and Pop gets to play with a contender. But I don't know. Chris, what about you?
One team that really sticks out to me, and I'm very big on these two teams in particular because of Kenny's history in their organization. The one team that sticks out to me is the Hawks, right? And the reason why I was thinking about this, and I tuned into the Hawks press conference the other day after their tough loss, and their coach just looked so broken. He just didn't know what to do with this roster, right? You got Clint Capella that's coming in, and you got other pieces such as John Collins, Trae Young, Kevin Huerter. Those pieces, right, except for Clint Capella, if you look at John Collins, Kevin Huerter, Trae Young, Cam Reddish, Deontay Hunter, I could see so many similar. I could only imagine what Kenny could do with that lineup, especially with him and his three-point shooting and kind of everything like that. I would love to see him in Atlanta and see what he could really do with these guys. And that's my first team. My second team is the New York Knicks. And I think because he was an assistant there during the two playoff runs, and he knows kind of what he would be walking into to an extent because of his time with their team, and kind of just that roster. As you see with the Knicks have no kind of real clear-cut answer how to take that second level, whether it's there's stuff just from off the court, what's going on with Dolan and the fans, and then just that whole image, to what is going on the court with their talent. Why aren't they sending certain guys to the G League to develop? Why are certain guys getting minutes over certain other guys? Why isn't Kenny Boone not getting minutes at all? Those answers are they're very just anonymous. But you just see what Kenny could really do with this, what he potentially could do with the New York Knicks and their kind of the roster makeup. Frank, I think that would be a very interesting project for Kenny. I think that especially because Kenny he knows French basketball. He's played over there before in the past with the Long Island Nets head coach, of course. Got to throw in that plug there. But I would say he knows. I think he could do some interesting stuff with those two teams. That's why I think it's the best fit for them. And at the same time, like we talked about earlier in the pod, with kind of that fit and did he have fun with his job, whatever the case is, he knows that, okay, I've done it on the Brooklyn level. I've helped that team kind of raise up in the very few amount of years in their rebuilds. So I would think those two destinations are best fit for Kenny. And I think that my end thought on this whole thing is Kenny's easily, we all could agree, Kenny's going to be a coach that's going to be very well targeted when come free agency.
Yeah, no, definitely agree.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then kind of this last question, it's not the last question of the pod, but it's kind of the last question when it comes to speculation, to say the least. We're going to start with Doug on this one. Do you think coaches, what kind of coaches do you think are going to be entering the hunt for the Nets next season?
Man, like the Pop thing sounds surreal because you feel like he wants to go out winning. That would be pretty cool. I mean, and he's coached these guys, not indirectly, I would say, with something more international play would be crazy. D'Antoni would be interesting because, they went way too small, in my opinion. I don't know about Mark Jackson only because he doesn't seem like, I don't know, all those history things of what happened towards the end of his career with the Warriors sounds a little weird. Like Lou is interesting only because, Kyrie and him had a falling out at the end. But part of Kyrie leaving the Cavaliers was, texting LeBron, obviously after or during his stint I can't remember, during his stint, I think, of Boston's like, you were right, or like, I'm sorry, like all that. So, I mean, I really wouldn't know, to be honest. You would like to think it's someone that has flexibility and can learn on the fly. You also want it to be someone who has the knowledge of playoffs, but also you got to see what their staff is too. Like, how many guys currently are going to remain on the staff? Is it like going to be a clean sweep? What about you, Matt?
I'm waiting till the end of the playoffs to really make an evaluation. I think that somebody will come available that we may not expect. Maybe somebody will just, if it's a tough loss. I mean, if depending upon what team it is, if you lose in the first round with expectations, or even like an expectation of making second round, third round, and it doesn't turn into that, then you just never know what's going to happen. If I were the Nets, I would take as much time as needed, wait for major changes to be made. Perhaps there's a team that's, kind of similar to what happened with the Hawks and Coach Bud a couple of years ago, where they decide, hey, we're actually going to go a different direction and surprise the entire league. Somebody with some I guess, like talent that may just be going on the wrong side of expiration. Obviously, the Spurs come to mind with that, and I think that's why he's been brought up so much, Popovich, I mean. But there could be somebody else that has that, and there's a lot of good coaches in this league right now. I'll say that much.
Yeah, to kind of give my final thoughts on it, like Matt, and I've said this from the beginning, I would like the Nets to be patient on this and really evaluate, wait till the season's over, see, like Matt said, see who's available. If I had to take a pick right now, I'm pretty confident it's going to be Ty Lue. I just feel like that's going to be kind of their, if not a finalist, at least. That's what I think. I just think that Ty Lue's influence that he's had on Kyrie in Cleveland, you got to remember that Kyrie just didn't have him as a head coach for those 2 years. He also had him as an associate head coach from 2014 to 2016. And on top of that, I'm not saying that, hey, it's going to be Kyrie picking out this guy, but Ty Lue is very respected around the league. You saw what happened with the Lakers noise kind of heading in when they were looking for a head coaching search, and who kind of mostly the persona on NBA Twitter with Tyronn Lue, kind of with these guys, the respect he has around the league, being a former player, and just he's a two-time NBA champion. He won with the Lakers back in 2000. He's obviously won in 2001 as well, and they're back-to-back. And on top of that, as a coach and stuff. So you just see kind of, and being the all-star coach, but on top of that, it's just kind of the well-liking of the players. And any other candidates, obviously Greg Popovich is a stretch. I think it would be, all right, it's a pretty good fit. I would like that, especially kind of leaving the Spurs and having probably Becky Hammond would take over if Pop does leave. But at this point, we could all agree that Jack Vaughn does not have a chance, that he's going to be kind of brought in as the next season's head coach full time. He's kind of that definition of what an interim coach is. And I would kind of just leave it as I would hope the Nets stay patient on this topic and really just make sure that who they pick it's going to really fit well. That's kind of what I'm going to lean towards.
Yeah, no, definitely. I forgot to mention Dave Yeager, who someone brought up that he got a shout out from Katie, I guess 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I think you'd be an interesting dark horse that wasn't mentioned. If you want a great list of variety, just check out Billy Reinhardt's piece on Nets Daily. Like, he was pretty thorough on that. A lot of guys, but I'm not good when it comes to picking coaches. Talking about roster, I think I'll have a better sense. But then again, things change when you put in new coaches. But anyways, let's ask the final question. Yes, it's still a little bit of speculating, but much further down the line, you would like to think. So if the Nets do not win a championship before Katie and Kyrie leave the team, I didn't say retire because you never know what may happen after the contracts are up. What do you think happens to the franchise? Matt, it's all yours.
Wait, if they don't win?
Yeah, like if empty-handed, all their time with the Nets, whether it's because they retire or they move on to another team to try this again somewhere else, whatever. What do you think happens to the franchise? What are your thoughts?
All right, well, I don't know, because in my head, I would say that Marks would rebuild and use some of the younger players. If someone like Claxton or Kubrick or whoever you want to pick from some of their really younger players, or even like Jared Allen, maybe try to rebuild around those guys. They'll sometimes be a little bit closer to their prime. I will say this, and Shams Charania made this pretty clear in the Excellence podcast episode with the Glue guys today, that Marks was nowhere close to being in risk of losing his job. But I will say this, if the Nets go through a tumultuous period of this title run and things don't look like they're going as planned, it won't be one of the two stars that gets moved and relocated. It'll be Marks, I think. I don't really feel like that's like a super hot take to even say. They've made the move of getting rid of the coach. They could obviously get rid of the next coach should that not work out. They could make a couple of minor trades. But eventually it's going to come down to those guys or Marks. And I'd assume that they would pick the two stars that they worked, forever essentially to get to this level. This is the highest point that the franchise has really ever been in. So, yeah, that's kind of what my response would be. I don't know who's going to be running the show, and, it'll be an obvious rebuild from there.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it was interesting you mentioned some of those players because this is like, let's say, at least 3 years down the line. Like, I guess you have faith that those players may not get traded, but or maybe, I don't know. But it would be interesting, some of these names that have been in recent rumors for a bit to be like down the line when Katie and Kyrie are at the end of their tenure in Brooklyn and may even retire after. But unless I misunderstood, but Matt, if you don't have anything else, Chris, why don't you take us home with your answer to that question?
Well, I would say if they don't win a championship, it's a clear disappointment. That's the number one kind of takeaway from the whole thing. If they don't win one, Obviously, everyone knows how hard it is to win an NBA championship in this league, no matter what talent you do have. It's hard, and especially with the Western Conference, those teams are powerhouses. You see the Lakers, you see the Clippers. Just those two teams you just kind of throw out there in the East. You see Milwaukee, even though the future of Giannis is kind of up in the air. But there's been some speculation that it would be surprising if he did leave. I'm a bit like a quick just kind of thing out there. I'm a big fan of Giannis kind of going to the Heat. That's kind of my kind of thing on it. But that's for another pod. But I would say, what do I think will happen to this franchise if they do not win a championship? It's clearly rebuilding, I would have to say, because obviously with KD, Kyrie's contracts, can't forget about DeAndre Jordan's. There's no trades. It's straight 4 years, $40 million. On top of that, they would just have to rebuild. That's the way to do it. You can't kind of do what kind of the Warriors in hoped of doing when they kind of just lost. Obviously, at that time, they still had the best shooting duo, arguably in NBA history at that time. But you see what happened when they're just not on the court. The Nets are a totally different equation. Obviously, you don't know what if the Nets are going to go out and really aggressively go for kind of a third star, their third option, like a Bradley Beal player, whatever the case is, in between that span. But if it stays how it is, just have KD and Kyrie be those big names on the roster, whatever the case is. And no matter kind of who they bring in, if they just don't win and KD and Kyrie leaves, goes to another team, retires, whatever the case is, the clear answer is going to just be a rebuild. They're going to have to rebuild and kind of just take it from step one or wherever stage they are at that they could fill in, but they shouldn't miss steps like they have proven in the past up until the signing kind of pushed over the expectations. But do what they did in the past 3 years, kind of see what Kenny has done, taking that slow, gradual, and the rebuild and stuff. So that's kind of an ideology of what would happen in this franchise if they didn't win a championship in the KD Kyrie era.
So I want to be a little more optimistic. You would like to think that the framework, assuming, they've competitive, they make to the finals at least one or two times during their full tenure with the Nets. Hopefully, that attracts the younger upcoming free agents. Hopefully they don't have to do a full rebuild because, if they do, it might go down as potentially one of the worst moments in Nets history, at least in the NBA. I don't know where you'd rank it, but you like to hope that if it's championship or bust, they don't have to do a full rebuild, that they've, just convinced the league that this is a franchise that's worth joining. Like, I'm not saying we're going to get Giannis after he's done with Milwaukee and whoever's in between, if that is in between, but you'd like to think that they will be a beacon going forward. Like, I'm not going to say the Spurs model where they'll be over, 40 wins or 50 wins, whatever it was, for X amount of seasons. Like, I don't think we're getting there because consistency at that level is hard this time of time. But anyways, I don't know. But one last bonus to that, where would you guys rank the failure if they do not win? Like, let's say 1 out of 10. What number would you give the franchise if they do not get a championship while these guys are associated with the team? Chris, you can go first on that one.
Man, especially in today's, just where they're located in the media market, just kind of just the overall big picture, it's up there. I can't give a clear number because obviously the circumstances behind the champion, if they make it to the finals and they're just not there, like kind of like a similarity to like the Buffalo Bills back in the day, they just kept having that high, just making it to the obviously in their case Super Bowls, but making it into the finals and just not kind of getting over that hump and edge. It's obviously a lot lighter than a first round, second round bust or whatever kind of wording you want to describe it. And you got to think about it this way: the Nets they're not totally familiar with it, but you got to look at back when they had the back-to-back finals appearances with the Jason Kidd and Vince Carter. Kind of that just whole era. You just look at that, right? When they just realized that they can't get over the hump, they couldn't get past Kobe and Shaq. Jason Kidd just couldn't lead that Nets over that hump with Jefferson and all them. What happened after that? They slowly started to trade the pieces away, and then obviously the rest is history. You saw the Nets go through the most rigorous kind of just season by season projection. You just see kind of what happened to that whole team just being, all right, the Nets are going to be in the lottery for the next 3 years. Hope they bank big. Okay, we got Brook Lopez. That was the kind of the turning point. That's kind of what happened with that franchise. But it depends on the circumstances. If they make it the back-to-back finals, whatever the case is, just can't get over that hump, the number's going to be lower because, don't get me wrong, they'll have the Nets on the map. They're going to show that they're an Eastern Conference powerhouse, Eastern Conference championships, the banners and all that. But if they just kind of slip out of a second round here and there, or they can't make it to the finals and back-to-back, whatever the case is, without having that championship trophy in that equation, if they just don't do any of it, it's a big failure. I would say, just sum it all up. If the finals aren't there, the final appearances aren't there, just kind of early playoff round exits, it's going to be at least an 8. At least an 8.
Yeah, and what about you, Matt?
How
would you rank, like, if they don't get that chip within the tenure of KD and Kyrie?
Like out of 10, essentially?
Sure. I mean, you can do letters too. Just
okay.
It's up to you if you want to do A-. A+. Like, I don't know if you believe in that or just A.
If they don't win a title, I mean, this is a pass fail. I don't even think you can grade it on like a scale. I think is like, with how much has gone, like they basically completely interrupted everything that, and I hate to say they, like it's only Kyrie and KD because it's a collective decision by the entire group, but they interrupted a slow building process for an immediate win now thing, which obviously you do 10 times out of 10. You'd still do it if they don't win. But I think it is a pass fail, and I think it should be looked at as such, with the way that they, especially even so far this year, the way they've gotten rid of Atkinson early on, somebody that was a big part of what they built. Yeah, I think I would just go with if this happens, then great. That's a wholehearted pass. If it doesn't happen, I know maybe other people will be different, but I'll be looking at that as a fail personally.
Yeah, championship or bust. I mean, you guys got it right. Now it's a nail. I know number system isn't really helpful, but pass fail is always easy. So, yeah, that's really all to it. So, Chris, let's take us home.
Yeah, well, Matt, first off, thank you for coming back on the pod. We always appreciate you. We always enjoy your insight, and we just, as a whole thing, just thank you for taking some time out of your night to join Doug and I.
Of course. Thank you, guys.
Of course. So, anyways, Chris, would you like to give the closing remarks?
Yeah, let's do it. So, guys, remember to feel free to email over any suggestions, questions, comments, or thoughts on any of our content by sending us an email at wingspanpodcast@gmail.com. And do not forget to follow us on our social media accounts, and please make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your preferred listening service. And as for next time, stay classy and take care.